folks that are looking to speak. It's not absolutely required, but it's appreciated that we log in all the speakers. All right, Chris, now we during the public, hearing process. Can't hear me? Okay, I'm glad I'm doing this. Can you hear me now? Yes. All right, good. I'll stay a little closer. So, if you didn't hear me, there's a sign-up sheet in the front lobby to sign in if you're planning on, in the public comment period, which is later on in the meeting, coming to the podium and speaking. At that point, this podium will be turned around and you'll be speaking from here. Okay. Thank you. Well, folks, it's 6:32. I'm going to call this meeting's order. I'm Brian Sullivan, I'm the chair of the Harwich Board of Appeals. Welcome to the meeting of the Harwich Board of Appeals on this date, June 18th. The purpose of this meeting is to hear and decide applications before the Board of Appeals, which have been brought pursuant to the bylaw of the town of Harwich, the Massachusetts Zoning Enabling Act, in MGL 40B. As required by law, the town may audio or video record this meeting, which we are. Any person intending to either audio or video record this open session is required to inform the chair. During this meeting, the chair will recognize promptly a member of the board, the secretary, the town attorney presenting the case, to inform the chair if a protocol is not being followed. Ken Dixon, member of my board, is not here yet. He normally keeps track of me from rules of order, so it's going to rely upon Amy tonight to keep me straight. While in open session, those wishing to present comments or ask questions regarding the case are requested to fill out the information form in the lobby table. With that in mind, I'd like to have the clerk call our case.
Case number 20. You hear me? Can you hear me now? No. All right, case number 2025-21. You hear me? Yes. Thank you. Queen Anne Acres, LLC, and Mid-Cape Church Homes, Inc. Business as Pine Oaks Village Homes. This case has been continued from hearing Thursday, the 24th of April, 2025.
I decided to do my narrative and speaking up front here because back on the stage, just feel a little buried and really out of connection with everybody. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to this important public hearing concerning Pine Oaks Village 4, a proposed development under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40B. As Chair of the Harwich Board of Appeals, I want to emphasize the significance of tonight's discussion as we review key aspects of the proposal related to traffic flow, transportation infrastructure, and public safety. First of all, I want to extend my gratitude to the dedicated town staff responsible for preparing the auditorium tonight. And that includes a special thank you to Kara McGlinney, the Executive Director of the Cultural Center, and also Director of Cultural Affairs for Harwich, and Sarah Eaton, the Harwich Information and Technology Director, who sit out front here. Both are responsible for a lot of hard work in designing the layout, setting up tables, microphones, and remote access for the meeting tonight. Also, I and the board very much appreciate the time and effort by Christine Flynn, the Harwich Planning Director, and Rachel Orr, the Harwich Zoning Compliance Officer, and the Board of Appeals Secretary for a lot of hours and hard work coordinating every aspect of these hearings. I can't properly express all the ways they've assisted the board, and especially myself. As you might expect, I've had some anxiety and jitters managing the process of this 40B and tonight's hearing. Earlier this week, as I stood on stage, checking on the setup, I was reminded the first time that I was center stage in an auditorium. It was the 8th grade, and I performed in the play HMS Pinafore, a comic opera by Gilbert Sullivan. I was a singing and dancing sailor, and the chorus line I sang was from I'm Called Little Buttercup. Now, I'll refrain from reprising that role tonight, unless things get tough. I mean, I probably could still remember some of the lines. So let's kick things off. And in a few moments, I'm going to be emphasizing the importance of finding facts, thoroughly examining this project information, and expert data and expert opinions. I want to confirm that our community knows how to find all the information, reports, and opinions that are available on our town's website. So let's start off with the main town website, and Sarah, if you could. So to get to the town website, the first thing you want to do is click on Government at the top. Then you're going to go down to Boards and Committees, and then from there down further you see the Board of Appeals. It's like 3 or 4 down. You click on the Board of Appeals, and one of the first items on the right side of the page, and scroll down a little bit, Sarah, if you could, is the Learn About 40B applications. And you'll see a Harwich 40B Forum MHP. When you click on that, that brings up, and go ahead please, and I'm not going to go through it, but there's a, what do you call it, a chart, there's a presentation of the 40B process as told by MHP. And so it's worthwhile if you get to know that. Again, understanding the rules of law may assist you as you form your opinions that you may want to speak to the board about. So you back out of this, please. Now on the blue side over there, if you go down, you see comprehensive permit project applications. You click on that, and you're going to see 2 projects. Previously completed approved one, which was on Route 28, that was approved a couple of years ago, and then the Pine Oaks Village 4, Queen Road. So you click on that, and now when you click on this, you're going to see the balance of the information that so far has been collected and put on for public information. So the first section, there we go. The first section indicates the schedule of meetings, and tonight we're at the June 18th meeting, traffic and public safety. And we expect that there'll be another meeting on traffic and public safety on July 9th. And then the schedule here is right now the meetings that have been tentatively scheduled. They may change, but at the moment, that's the current schedule. It's important to note, if you get down a little bit, that, Sarah, just go up a little bit, please. Okay. The date we have of October 21st, that's a date 180 days since the first meeting. And our board needs to make, at this point, unless there's a continuance in the process, and the applicant and the board mutually agree on the continuance to expand the meeting times, to add more dates, and maybe other meetings that might be needed. Then we'll be adding going past the October 21st date. But as of right now, October 21st is the date that public hearings will end, and then our board has 40 days to make a decision. So that's the process. Now, get on a little further. Here you'll see the initial application and plans, and these are all available documentation if you haven't already accessed it. And by the way, based upon some of the opinions that I've read that have been sent in, several of you have read this information. So I thank you for that. That's very important. The next section here is the presentation by the applicants, which was pretty much it's a full presentation, and most of it was presented during the initial April meeting. But this is their presentation book of the project. So you go back into that and see everything they're looking to accomplish. The next section on this is letters from the public. So if you want to confirm your letter was received and it's been given to the board, it will be on this list. If your letter is not on this list, and this is by alphabetical, the last name of the party, but it does also show the date. These are all the opinion letters that we've received so far regarding the application. Oh, and I did miss one thing, and I apologize. Inter-department comments. So right here is a listing of all the opinions that have been submitted so far by departments in Harwich. And it also includes an opinion from Cape Cod Commission. Because it's a 40B, actually the Cape Cod Commission doesn't act as a board or committee for the town of Harwich. They don't have regulatory authority over the decision. That's strictly the Board of Appeals. But they are giving input, and I believe at some point they may also be doing a presentation here at a future meeting. I know it's not a public period, but are there any questions on this? All right, good. Hopefully that means that I explained it correctly. Yes.
You said April. Is that 2024?
Our first meeting was this last April. That was April 20th, I forget the exact date. And the board has 6 months, 180 days, to complete this process. So, obviously, there's ample time for you folks to consider all the presentations, consider the facts, particularly facts from experts, and use that information to support any opinions you may have, for or against. It's very important that our board, considers it. So, I'll be down here in a minute, but Chapter 40B is designed to facilitate the development of affordable housing while allowing local communities to assess the impacts of such projects on essential municipal services. This hearing tonight specifically focuses on the potential effects of the proposed development on roadways, pedestrian access, emergency services, and overall public safety. Our role as a Harwich Board of Appeals is to gather information, ensure that our decision-making process remains thorough, fair, and based on well-informed considerations and quantitative facts where possible. Tonight, we'll hear from traffic engineers from both the applicant and VHB, the beer group company hired by the town of Harwich. There will also be testimony from the Harwich Police Police and Fire Departments, Harwich Advocacy, and the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust. The board and myself, I sent out invitations to key committees and town departments and boards that their charge directly reflects aspects of this proposal. And many have responded, and tonight we have these 4 departments and committee scheduled to speak. Following presentations, the board will discuss and ask questions, and then members of the community will be invited to speak during the public comment period. We ask all participants follow respectful discourse, allowing each speaker to present their perspective without interruption. When I open the floor for public comments, our residents and stakeholders will have an opportunity to present their opinions, ask questions, or provide feedback on tonight's topic. All opinions and facts on how this development aligns with local needs, traffic patterns, and emergency response capabilities are important to the board. Tonight there may be times when you feel compelled to clap. And that's okay. I'm not going to gavel clapping. I just want to point out that it takes away from the time we have tonight for all the speakers. So the more clapping, the less time for public comment. But it's going to be your call. Okay. Before we proceed, I'd like to make an important clarification. As members of the board, it is our responsibility to ask questions throughout this hearing. Please understand that any questions posed by board members should not be interpreted as indicating support of or an opposition to the proposal. Our questions are intended solely to gather information, clarify points, and ensure we fully understand all aspects of this comprehensive permit application. As I emphasized in the last meeting, these hearings should not be a referendum on the 40B comprehensive permitting process and regulations. It is an established law which this board cannot change nor ignore in our deliberations. With that in mind, I want to discuss one 40B guideline which I feel is pertinent to this evening's topic. Road infrastructure and related issues, especially pre-existing ones, have typically been decided by the courts and state officials to be the responsibility of the community and not the applicant. ZBA decisions to deny or condition a 40B application based upon general worries, and I say general worries, about increased traffic, lack of sidewalks, pedestrian and other roadway difficulties, are only considered valid if the project would cause extreme traffic and safety issues supported by expert data. So this is important, so I'm just going to repeat this statement. ZBA decisions to deny or condition 40B applications based on general worries about increased traffic, lack of sidewalks, pedestrian and other roadway difficulties are only considered valid if the project would cause extreme traffic and safety issues supported by expert data. The key consideration is to cause extreme traffic and safety issues. Honestly, I don't know how to define that at this point. And I'm sure the rest of my board does not either. Is it subjective or a quantitative judgment? Is it a number or a percentage increase? How is extreme measured? I expect each of us to have an opinion on what extreme means regarding Queen Anne Road and Main Street traffic. Perhaps this evening we can get clarification and answers from the traffic and board consultants on how it is defined. I look forward to learning from the experts today. As stated, important to the Board of Appeals is identifying final facts, expert data, and opinions. This should also be important to anyone that plans to express an opinion during public comment period. Public testimony tonight is valued by this board. Therefore, I want to suggest you be mindful of the 40B guidelines and perhaps tailor your testimony to to include documented facts to support your opinion. Your testimony supported by expert data will be very important to the board's eventual deliberation. And this is one reason why I wanted to see the website and where all the information is being held. Our goal is to ensure that this proposed development prioritizes the safety and well-being of both Pine Oak Village residents and our community, especially the Queen Anne Road and Main Street neighborhoods, while adhering to applicable zoning and 40B planning regulations. With that, concluding, folks, I'd like to turn this over to our first presenter regarding the traffic input assessment prepared by Vanessa and Associates, the Jeffrey Dirk. Okay, and he'll be followed by Michael Santos, who's the traffic specialist consultant from VHB, hired by the town of Harwich. Thank you. Thank you for saving the time of my clapping.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and members of the audience. As the chair mentioned, my name is Jeffrey Dirk. I'm the managing partner with Vanessa Associates, and we're the transportation consultants.
Pick up, ma'am.
You can wet your lips.
Can you hear me now? Is this good? Okay, great. Thank you, and I apologize. So again, by way of introduction, my name is Jeffrey Dirk. I'm the managing partner with Vanessa Associates, and we are the transportation consultants for the applicant. If I start to drift off, I'll just yell out and I'll move the microphone closer. So I'm going to go through a few slides that are a summary of the transportation assessment that we prepared in consultation with the town, the Cape Cod Commission, and the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And I think consistent with what the chair had spoken about in the introduction, really our goal as the applicant's transportation consultant is to assess the impacts of the project. But we have the same goals that the town does as well. As we're assessing these impacts, what we're also trying to do is look at the existing conditions of the transportation infrastructure that serves the site and really make sure from the baseline level that access to the project is provided in a safe manner, but we're also looking beyond that to see as the project and its traffic is added to the roadway network, we want to make sure that it's safe. It's safe for pedestrians, bicycles, and motor vehicles. So really what we're looking at is a common goal, I think, between the applicant as well as the town. And I think the benefit of the comments that we received from the peer review consultant and also some very thoughtful comments from the departments as well. And we're very appreciative, in particular, of the comments from the police department, which we did receive today. But as we're looking at those, what's always helpful to us is not only understanding the safety perspective as it relates to the town's professional staff, but also the offer of observations on what could be done to improve the situation. Because I think that as we go through this process, what our goal is really to present to you a list of recommendations or improvements that could be done either as a part of the project or things that the applicant, through the creation of affordable housing at this site, can assist the town with advancing through state funding that's available due to the fact of creating affordable housing at this site. So what we're hopeful is that as we go through this process, that's where we will be with you eventually, is presenting a menu of items both to be constructed or implemented as a part of the project, but also things that the developer can do to facilitate improvements through working with the town and the state to obtain grant monies to actually design and construct some improvements. So as I'll go through these slides, you can go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, what I'm going to do is go through a high-level summary of the transportation assessment. Now, as we go through these, just a couple of things for context. So our original transportation assessment was prepared in October of 2023. Okay, so it's dated as of now. We provided an update in November of last year, really looking at the changes in the traffic volumes associated with the project, because there's been some refinements, and I think we'll be preparing an update to this assessment that will also reflect some further refinements to the project. That update will be done to address the comments from your peer review consultant that we had received on Friday, and I know he'll make a presentation to you tonight. He has gone through a thorough review of our transportation assessment, and I think before I get into each of the slides, just kind of a high-level overview, really the role of the peer review consultant is first and foremost to make sure that the study follows accepted standards, accepted practices, so that as you're looking at this information, you can rely upon the data that's presented to you. If there's questions about the data, your review consultant then asks us to undertake some additional analysis. As it relates to the data that's been presented and the evaluations of the project's impacts, the consultant has basically agreed with the methodology. We do have some work that we need to do, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In each of these slides, you'll see, the bottom of the slide will have some red text. The red text on a number of these slides is going to talk about what we need to do to address the comments from your peer review consultant. So I think as the chair was going through the schedule of hearings, that's one of the reasons why we need to come back to you and talk about transportation, is because there'll be an update to this transportation assessment. So now in terms of going through a summary of the study, as I mentioned, the study is prepared in consultation with the town, I think importantly, as well as Mass DOT and the Cape Cod Commission. The reason for that is that we're taking an objective evaluation of the transportation system. The local community obviously knows the roadways much better than we do, because we're taking really a snapshot in time when we're undertaking the assessment, but I don't live in Harwich, and so those of you that use the roadway and your professional staff as well, it's important that we interact with them to make sure that we have an understanding of the roadway network as it exists today, but also future planning that the town may have for improvements or additional developments in the area. And so that's why that consultation is very important. So we've undertaken that. The other thing to mention is this is a transportation assessment. So transportation, just by its definition, we're looking at all modes of basically moving of people and goods. So it's pedestrians, bicycles, and motor vehicles, and the safety of all of those modes. And I think the chair had stressed that that's probably one of the most important things that we're looking at, is the safety of all of those modes of transportation. Now, as we look at the overall impact of the project, before and after the traffic was added from this development, we didn't show any significant changes in terms of increased delay in vehicle queuing. Now, I want to really caveat that, because it doesn't mean that in July and August that at the Pleasant Valley Road Queen Anne intersection, it's just free-flowing traffic. When you green light, you get to go through that intersection. That's not what that means. What it means is when we look at delays and we look at the backup in vehicles, the queuing that happens at intersections before and after the project's traffic is added, we didn't see significant changes in those, but it doesn't mean that there isn't delays. So during the summer month conditions, we all know that there are backups and queues that happen at the intersection. So just to quantify what the project's impacts are, they're primarily focused at the Queen Anne Road intersection with Pleasant Valley. Delays overall at the intersection did go up by more than 15 seconds over the course of an hour, and that the backups that happen didn't go up by any more than 4 to 5 vehicles. So again, just looking at that, if there's 10 vehicles in the queue today, let's say if you're trying to get through that traffic light, what we're saying is that instead of 10, there'll be 14 to 50. And that's going to happen during I want to really stress this, that's peak summer month conditions. Off-peak conditions, so the majority of the year, the impacts are much less. In operating conditions, in fact, as I was driving through the intersections today, there was really no backups. I went right through the traffic signal at Queen Anne and Pleasantly. So under those conditions, the impact of the project is really minor. It's really looking at the summer conditions, and I think that's really what people remember, is how long does it take to get through these intersections. And that's where what we're saying is you're probably going to experience 4 to 5 additional vehicles in queue, and that was really at the signalized intersection of Queen Anne and Pleasantville. The other intersections, the queues went up by about 1 to 2 vehicles at the stop sign controlled intersections that I'll talk about in a minute. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of the impacts of the project. But again, that does not mean it's free-flowing traffic. It is not going to see time conditions. So that's what I had mentioned. The next bullet is just the Queen Anne Pleasant Lake intersection. That's where we had noted that there are delays that occur there. Those will continue with or without the project. The driveway to the project, so the access into the property, as we look at the delays getting out of the driveway, so this is for our residents that will be leaving, looking to turn left or right coming out of the driveway. The delays were really minor, and we had predicted that operating conditions with delays would be somewhere in the 15 to 20 second range, that's how long it would take to be able to get out of the property itself. Importantly, as we're looking at access for emergency vehicles, is we want to make sure we don't have significant queuing of the driveway, so that if the driveway were to back up to a point that if a fire truck, a police car, or an ambulance was trying to come in, that they would have difficulty making that maneuver coming in. We would want to make sure we design the driveway so that doesn't happen. The queuing is not significant. It's about 1 to 2 vehicles, which means if there is an emergency, a fire truck or a police car or ambulance needs to get into the project site, the driveway is designed with, appropriately so the corner radius, the fire truck can swing in, even if there's a vehicle stopped at a stop sign with 1 to 2 vehicles. And that's what we're looking at in terms of safety and accessibility as it relates to the driveway. Now, safety, there's 2 components that we look at safety in the assessment. The first is the speed of traffic on Queen Anne Road, and we look at that speed in relation to the measured speed in relation to the posted speed. So we want to see how are people using the roadway, actually driving it, and then how does that relate to the posted speed limit on the roadway itself. We also look at motor vehicle crash history. So that crash history, we obtain information that the police department provides to the registry of motor vehicles, and then that is published by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. We, as well as any public, can go on to MassDOT's website. They do have a crash data portal and a safety section in their website where you can actually look at motor vehicle crashes throughout the Commonwealth, and you can zoom in on the town of Harwich, look at any of the intersections within the town, and obtain crash information for notifications. One of the things the state does publish as well is what's known as a high crash location database. So they have locations within the Commonwealth that have a disproportionate number of crashes happening, or a severity, or the type of crashes in terms of their severity rises above what would be expected at similar intersections. They classify that as a high crash location. So we look at the crash data. We also look at this high crash location database that's available. As we look at the study area that we've evaluated as a part of the project, the only location that is a high crash location is the signalized intersection of Queen Anne and Pleasantville. So that is, it's a high crash location. It is on the state's high crash location listing as well. This was identified by your peer review consultant, so we'll be undertaking additional review of that intersection, in particular looking at safety-related items at that location. In terms of the other safety parameter, as I was mentioning, we're measuring speed of traffic along Queen Anne Road. We're looking at that in relation to, as I said, posted speed versus the speed that people are actually driving, but that also translates into sight lines at our driveway. One of the most important things that we do initially in the study is, as the access to the project is proposed, we want to make sure that the sight lines looking to the left or right coming out of the property are sufficient, not just for the posted speed limit, but for the speed that people are actually driving the roadway. And so I think the letter from the police department probably punctuated this very well, but as we undertook our analysis, people are not driving the posted speed. So at the location where the driveway is located, the posted speed limit is 30 miles an hour. And I know the police do some enforcement activities along the roadway. As we look at speed of traffic, we actually look at it over multiple days. So to the extent that there's any speed enforcement, we're looking at time periods when that speed enforcement is not taking place as well. What we found is that with a posted speed limit of 30, the majority of the vehicles on that roadway, and so that would be 85% or less, are driving at 40 miles an hour, so about 10 miles an hour above the posted speed limit where the driveway is located at the project site. Obviously, that means 15% are going faster than 40 miles an hour. I think the police department reported they had some real, fast-moving vehicles along the roadway itself. We don't design for those outliers. Those are things that really enforcement is something that hopefully will take care of some of that. But what we design for is the speed which 85% of the vehicles are traveling at or below. That's a typical design parameter that's used. So everything we're doing as it relates to safety in the design of the driveway is based on 40 miles an hour, so 10 miles an hour above the posted speed where the driveway is. And based on our evaluation of the sight lines at 40 miles an hour, we've determined that the sight lines that are available either currently meet what's required for 40 miles an hour or above, or there is some vegetation trimming that can take place either on the project site or within the town right-of-way that would allow for those sight lines to meet what's required for the 40 mile an hour road speed. I do also want to mention that we looked at sight lines at the Main Street access into the property, so at the back end, because there is right-of-way that extends down to Main Street. You may have conducted a site visit already, but if you look at the Main Street access into the property, when you stand out, I think if you look to the east, so looking to the left if you're exiting, there is a horse path that's there with a fence around it. Unfortunately, as it relates to that access being able to serve the project, that fence along the horse path is a continuous obstruction that you can't see through. And it just unfortunately lines up perfectly that as a motorist you can't see through the slats in that fence. So for that reason, that's why as you look through the assessment, you'll see that we recommended that access be emergency only or for pedestrian bicycles. But we can't allow vehicular traffic to use it because of that sight line obstruction looking to the left or to the east as you're exiting the driveway. So So this slide just shows the context of the project site. So you can see the project here in yellow, and here's that little stub that comes out to the Main Street access. So that's where we were speaking of the emergency access. Probably difficult to see, but Queen Anne Road is in this location here, extending up to Pleasant Lake and the intersection here. Main Street is traveling in this direction here. You can just barely see the Cape Cod Rail Trail which comes up and then crosses in this location here, and then we have the Old Colony Rail Trail here. I point out the rail trails because that is it's an important amenity, I know, for the community, but also will be an amenity for the residents of this project as well. So a little bit clearer in terms of just the roadway network that's in the vicinity of the project site. And this looks at the study area that we had evaluated as a part of our assessment. And I will speak about the study area in a minute in terms of the comments from your peer review consultant. But the study area that we had evaluated was basically the Main Street corridor extending to and including Depot Street all the way down to Great Western Road and Main Street in this location here, and then Queen Anne Road extending from the Main Street intersection, which I know the chair was mentioning here, this location here, all the way up to Pleasant Lake Avenue. Now, those are the locations where the traffic in the project is going to, as it comes out, turns left or right, and I'll show a dispersal back in a minute, it's going to end up at one of these intersections. As we look at kind of the distribution of traffic, we're expecting it to be almost equally split in terms of going to east or west along Queen Anne Avenue, and then once it gets out to the endpoints of either Main Street or up at Pleasant Avenue, then some of that traffic starts to peel off and use various roadways. So the numbers get smaller and smaller as you go away from the site, and that's why, as I mentioned, dispersal of traffic as you get further from the site, as people go to their destinations, they're using different turning movements and going through different intersections. The general parameter that we look at in terms of the study area, the Department of Transportation suggests that we study any intersection where the project will add 100 or more peak hour trips, or will increase traffic by 5% or more. So that's the general rule of thumb in terms of establishing what intersections do you look at. The Cape Cod Commission has a more stringent standard. And the Cape Cod Commission says that if we are subject to Cape Cod Commission review, it's any intersection that you add 25 or more trips to. And so it's a much lower threshold, which means the number of intersections that we look at increases from that. So the red note at the bottom is a comment from the peer review consultant as they looked at those parameters, so going outside of the DOT standards, but looking at the Cape Cod Commission standards. Most of the traffic on this project, as it gets dispersed, is going to end up at the Route 6 interchange, at the Pleasant Lake Avenue ramps at the interchange. So what was asked is that we extend the study area to include the interchange with Pleasant Lake Avenue and Route 6. So we will be doing that as a part of our assessment. We've been, I'd say, fortunate in that kind of our delay in coming before you with the project has allowed not only homework to be done by the team, but also the town has had a North Harwich transportation study done. So we have the benefit of that study, which included those intersections. So we'll be using the information that the town has as a part of their study for us to incorporate in our assessment. I think what's important about that is that consistency. So I think what you're going to see is consistency between the numbers that we're using in our assessment and the numbers that the town has in their assessment. And you should see consistency in terms of volumes, but also impacts, because this project was included in the town study. And so what we're expecting, again, is consistency in terms of our findings and what the town has in their North Harwich transportation study. I would just also mention, our study was done in October of 2023 when it was published. Our traffic counts were collected in July of 2023, so we have peak season traffic counts. The transportation study that was done for the town, the traffic counts were not done during the summer months, but projections were made to summer months. If you have a chance to look at the traffic volumes at our intersection, in particular the Pleasant Lake Avenue intersection with Queen Anne, and compare our numbers to the projections from the town's consultant study, you will see the numbers are in general agreement. So I think that's good, at least from my standpoint, in going forward and adding those additional intersections to our study area, because there's consistency in the data, even though our data may be a year or two off from when the town collected the data, but those adjustments that are made to the traffic counts, and that's one of the things that your consultant evaluates as well, what it's showing is the numbers are consistent, right? It's very distinct if you compare the two studies. So that's good. So that's really homework that I have in going forward, and some information that I'll be presenting to you in subsequent hearings that update the assessment. Now, just in terms of providing some numbers and quantifying existing conditions on the roadway network. So I already mentioned traffic speeds along Queen Anne Avenue. We measured speeds over 2 days. The volume of traffic on Queen Anne Road at the time that we had conducted our assessment, under average month conditions, the road accommodates about 5,000 vehicles per day. So two-way traffic going along that roadway if you measured it over 24 hours. That number during summer months jumps about 2,000 additional vehicles. So you have about 7,000 vehicles on that road during summer months. So it's very distinct in terms of how the traffic volumes change in summer months, and that measurement bears out. So as we're measuring the speed of traffic, because we're measuring the speed over 2 days, and we did it during the summer months, so if we have 7,000 vehicles per day, and we measure speed over 2 days, we're measuring the speed of 14,000 vehicles on the Queen Anne Road. So as we measure the speed of 14,000 vehicles going by the site, as I mentioned, posted speed in the vicinity of where the driveway is 30 miles an hour. The majority, or 85% of those vehicles, were going 40 miles an hour or below. So again, it's about 10 miles an hour above the posted speed limit. Again, that's important as we're designing the roadway itself. The peak hours of the roadway, so when the traffic volumes are the highest or heaviest along the roadway, occur in the morning between 8 and 9, based on the measurements that we had undertaken. And then in the evening between 4:30 and 5:30 in the evening. So that's when the peak of the roadway traffic happens. I mention that because when we assess the impacts of the project, what we do is we calculate the peak hour of traffic for the project, and then we add it onto the peak hour of the roadway. So it's peak on top of peak. So when I'm talking about the impacts of the project, what we are presenting to you is a worst-case scenario where the peak of the project coincides with the peak traffic flow on the roadway, and then we look at delays in vehicle queuing under those conditions. So we want to make sure the road functions in an appropriate manner during those time conditions, and I think most importantly is we develop mitigation measures. So retiming of traffic signals and things like that. What we want to make sure is that we can accommodate the peak of the peak, and that retiming results in some benefit in terms of traffic operations. If that results in a benefit, then that means all other times of the day, things are going to be better than what we've estimated as a part of our assessment of the project and the mitigative measures as a part of the project. So some other things to point out on the slide here, I mentioned where you see the green on this. This is where the rail trails are located. The existing crosswalk on Queen Anne Road at this location here. Also, what we've shown on here is where there are sidewalks. And I think what you see is there's an absence of sidewalks along Queen Anne, along Main Street, as well as along Pleasant Lake Avenue. There is sidewalk along Depot Street. That's the only location in our study area where we had noted that there were sidewalks in the area. So the bicycle accommodations that exist are the rail trail. Pleasant Lake Avenue provides sufficient width for a shared traveled way. So what that means is that if a bicyclist is riding on the shoulder side, that a motor vehicle driving along the roadway shouldn't have to cross the center line and go around the bicyclist. So it just means there's sufficient width. It's not wide enough that you can strike bike lanes, but it's sufficient to what DOT would classify as a shared traveled way. So that's what that means. If a bicyclist is there, the motor vehicle shouldn't have to cross the center line to go around the bicyclist. The rest of the roadways are not sufficient, don't provide sufficient width for bicycles, shared traveled way accommodations. There are also, there's no public transportation services in this area. Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority, I think their closest bus services are along Route 28 to the south of the project site or to the north of the study area. There's no service within this area. The Town Council on Aging does provide transportation services for seniors within the town, and the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority also provides dial ride services. So no direct public transportation services, but as we're looking at the demographics of who may live at this project, we obviously want to make sure that they're aware of the services that are available to seniors in particular in this area. So that's one of the recommendations that we have as a part of our study. So this slide shows what we expect to be the transportation or traffic characteristics of the project, and I will explain the columns that you see here. What we've shown you in this column B, this is what we've assessed in the October 2023 transportation assessment for the traffic characteristics of the project. This is the current development program, and actually these numbers we're going to get refined as well, and I suspect they're actually going to go down a little bit for a couple of reasons. But this is what the transportation assessment is based on, that your peer review consultant looked at. I'll just go through the numbers with you. I'm going to focus on this column A because this is the current development program for the project. So the first number you see, the 1,904, that's the 24-hour number. So if you stood at the driveway to the project and you counted every vehicle that enters and exits the project site, this is residents, it's users of the daycare facility, it also includes FedEx, UPS, Uber, Lyft, any type of vehicle that you would expect that would serve a residential property. So if you counted all of those vehicles going in and out of the property, that's the number that you would expect that you would arrive at. It's two-way traffic, so half of those vehicles are going in, half is going out. The total is 1,904. That is the number that we talked about, how much traffic is on Queen Anne today. So about 5,000 vehicles average month conditions, 7,000 vehicles under peak summer month conditions. That's the number that would get added to that number, 5,000 to 7,000. You would add the 1,904 on top of that number. The next number, the 155, this is the morning peak hour. So this is 8 to 9 in the morning, when Queen Anne has somewhere between 5 to 700 vehicles. We would add 155 on top of that 5 to 700 vehicles. About 3/4 of that traffic is exiting, because in the morning, most of the traffic is exiting. About 25% will be entering, and the total will be 155. The 183, that's that evening time period, so 4:30 to 5:30 in the evening when the traffic is at its highest level on Queen Anne. During the evening time period, the road accommodates about 700 vehicles per hour, so it's a higher volume flow during the evening peak hour than during the morning hour. We'll be adding 183 vehicles to that. This is the reverse of what you have in the morning, so 3/4 will be entering, and about 25% will be exiting from the project site itself. So these are the traffic volumes for the current development program, inclusive of the daycare facility itself. This last column is really just for context. It shows how much reduction in traffic happened as a result of refinements of the development program from the October 2023 traffic study. So it's less traffic because the number of residential units went down between the October study and the current development program. So I'll just provide that as context because anyone who's looked at the October traffic study, the numbers have gotten less. And so as I'm talking about the impacts of the project as I presented to you tonight, the impacts are actually lower than what we had presented in the October study just because of the numbers in terms of trip generation. So once we've assessed how much increased traffic the project is expected to generate, the next thing we need to do is to add it to the roadways and to the intersections. And I mentioned that in the initial part of the presentation, which we call dispersal of traffic. So traffic is generated from within the project site, and now it comes out of the project site and it distributes itself onto the roadway network. And that's what's shown on the slide here. This is how that traffic that we had seen in the previous slide distributes itself in each of the roadways and intersections within the study area. So what you see on the slide here is about half the traffic is oriented to and from the east, half of it is oriented to and from the west. Once it gets out to the Main Street intersection and then the Depot Street, the traffic starts to break out a little bit, so we have 15% coming down to Great Western Road, and then over to Depot Street, we have 20% to the north, 15% to the south, and then over to the Queen Anne Lake side, the Pleasant Lake Avenue side, 35% of the traffic is expected to go up to the Route 6 interchange. And again, that's one of the reasons why your consultant had asked that we look at the interchange, because 35% of the trips are expected to be oriented in that area. 10% will continue on Queen Anne Road toward Route 28. 5% will be heading to and from the south on Pleasant Lake Avenue. So that's the dispersal of the traffic in the project. And that's really why, as I mentioned, if we have 155 vehicles, 183 vehicles during each of those peak hours, so over a 60-minute period, we're producing 155 vehicles in the morning, 183 in the evening. That traffic then half goes to the left, half goes to the right, and it gets out to the intersections, and then it distributes itself even more. So those numbers large up the driveway, but as we get away from the project site, the numbers get smaller and smaller. And so the impacts are reduced once you get further away from where the driveway is located. Now, the way that this dispersal pattern is created, at least in this case, what we do is we look at U.S. Census journey to work data for residents of Town Harwich. So as you complete your census form, you report that you live within the town, but you also report for those that are working where you work. And so that information is published. We're able to look at that. These will be residents of the town of Harwich, so we can look at where do the residents of the town of Harwich work, and then once we understand where the residents work, we can look at, from this site, how do you get to those employment centers? So just like you would do if you're planning a trip, you can go on Google Earth and do your planning, and you would say, okay, if I work in Barnstable and I live at this site and it's the morning peak hour, what is the travel route that it would take you, taking into account delays and on the roadways, and it gives us a routing. And so we can look at all of that routing as it relates to those employment centers, and that's how we come up with the pattern that you see here. We then also look at the traffic counts as well. So if as an example, if the Pleasant Lake Avenue intersection is highly congested, and what we see in terms of looking at the traffic counts is people are avoiding it. So the census data may say that there's a heavy distribution of traffic to the east, but the traffic counts say that that's actually not what's happening, because that local knowledge says I'm going to avoid some of these intersections. We then refine the pattern to be reflective as well of that local knowledge based on the traffic counts that we perform. So we put that all together and we arrive at what you see on this page here. Now the homework, which is shown in the red here, there's two things that your consultant has asked us to do. The first is, since we published the study, there is a new census data that's available to us. So what they've asked us to do is review this again to see if the new census data has resulted in any changes. As you look at the new census data, probably not surprising to any of you, there's a significant work from home percentage. That the data that we were looking at previously was pre-COVID, and now we have COVID data that is post-COVID. And that data is showing a significant work from home trend, which is to some extent skewed some of the employment center data as well. And so what we're going to be doing is seeing if the removal of the work from home trend, that has altered some of these patterns. So we're going to be doing that again as a part of our homework assignment. The other thing is specific to the daycare center portion of the project. So the daycare center portion, we're expecting, of course, it will serve the residents of the project, so it's going to be very convenient for them, which will actually reduce the amount of trips associated with the daycare center. But its trip pattern may be different than the trip pattern of the residents of the project, and the reason for that is that it may be more following of existing traffic patterns, because for daycare centers, you generally, to some extent, will pick a daycare center that's on your way to work. And so the pickup and drop-off would be more likely to follow existing traffic patterns. And so they've asked us also to look at that. So we'll actually be creating two separate trip dispersal patterns, one for the residential component, one for the daycare component, with the residential component being based on the latest census data, and the daycare component being more related to existing traffic patterns, just given the fact that that's the nature of how that type of facility will function. So we'll be doing that again as a part of the home assignment that we have. So, as I was mentioning, assessing of the impacts of the project. So the next slides will talk about some of the recommendations that we have as a part of our assessment. As we're assessing any project on the Cape or the islands, we look at average month conditions. So the majority of the year, excluding July and August, essentially. So those are average conditions. We also look at peak summer month conditions. So we presented our assessment two types of analysis. One looking at peak summer conditions, one looking at average conditions, and we look at the project's impact during both of those time periods. So during average conditions, so the majority of the year, the intersections within the study area, and I think consistent with your Harwich North transportation study, the majority of the intersections function with limited delay. So limited delay being overall, most of the movements function with delays of 35 seconds or less and limited vehicle keeping. So that's the majority of the year. And the project's impacts during those time periods, we really didn't see that there was any significant changes in terms of delays at those intersections. So the majority of the year, the project's producing traffic as it disperses itself and gets out to intersections. There wasn't any significant changes in terms of added delay or vehicle queue. During the summer months, that is much different. In particular, the Depot Street intersection and the signalized intersection with Pleasant Avenue have excessive delays for specific movements, even before the project is constructed. So we did note that the Main Street approach to Depot Street is operating, during the summer months, it's operating over its design capacity. So it's something where we have capacity of an intersection that we define as we report traffic operations just like a report card, which you get at school. So it's A through F. With A being very good traffic operations, limited delay, limited vehicle queuing. F is a failing condition, so that's a condition where an intersection or movement's operating over its design capacity. We define capacity as an E, so it's, D is considered passive. So ideally, we want everything to do better, and that's considered to be acceptable. E is capacity, F is overcapacity. So in terms of looking at operating conditions, average month conditions, movements at intersections are D or better at the intersections. And that's consistent with what was reported in the North Harwich transportation study at these intersections. Summer month, we have a number of movements that are over capacity. So that's F, E or F at some of these intersections. Those conditions were, as I mentioned, the Main Street approach to Depot Street, that was an F, it's over capacity. We have movements at the present Lake Avenue during the summertime that are E's or F's, just because of the volume of traffic with extended queue. So as we look at the dispersal of trips from the project, of course, we have about 50% of the traffic is on that Queen Anne approach to Pleasant Lake Avenue, and we have 35% on the Main Street approach to Depot Street. So those are the movements that are operating over capacity during the summer month conditions, with or without the project's traffic. We had limited impact at the Depot Street intersection in terms of added delay of queuing. The queuing went up by about one vehicle because, again, 35% of the trips were there. However, on the Queen Anne Road approach, because we have 50% of the traffic going there, that's where we saw that 4 to 5 vehicle increase in queuing on that end of the intersection. That's also one of the locations where it's a single travel lane. So unlike Pleasant Lake Avenue, we have separate left turn lanes. We don't have the same benefit on Queen Anne Road. So I'm mentioning that because our next step is recommendations and working with the town as well as your consultant to come up with potential improvements that can be done at these intersections. So those are the type of things, high crashes, intersections operating over capacity, where we focus in on what we can do as a part of this project to address those conditions. So if you look at the next slide, please. So the next set of slides are going to talk about the recommendations that we have. And these are things that, again, we're going to be refining because of the additional analyses that we've been asked to undertake as a part of the project. So the first set of recommendations are site access, internal circulation within the property. And these are really things that are going to be shown on our site plans. So this is making sure that as we come into the project site, the driveway is designed, as I mentioned, most importantly, so that emergency vehicles can get in and out of the property. They don't turn over center lines. So we want to make sure as the fire truck, that's our design vehicle, as it's coming into the site, the corner radii are designed so the truck can come in. It doesn't need to slow excessively on Queen Anne. It can turn in, doesn't cross the stop line coming out of the driveway. If it's entering or exiting, we don't want the fire truck, or actually the fire truck can't swing over the center line of Queen Anne when it comes in. So there's no wide turns allowed, unless the fire chief allows that to happen. The fire code says that's not allowed. The fire truck has to stay on the proper side of the center line. So it's important the driveway is designed to make sure that all of those maneuvers work. And the fire chief, of course, will review that and they provide turn driving. So that's kind of the first set of recommendations. Traffic control within the site as well as coming out on Queen Anne, so stop sign, stop line. We'll have a double yellow center line in the driveway. The double yellow center line, it's not so much within the site important, but what's important is as the vehicles come up the Queen Anne Road, and I mentioned that there's queuing, especially during the summertime, we want vehicles properly positioned on the correct side of the center line. Again, that's important because if they're stopped there and the fire truck comes in, they're probably not going to move. The fire truck has to be able to come in. We want that vehicle on the proper side of the center line so the truck can make the maneuver. So that's why it's important as it relates to the access into the site. Sidewalks within the project site, crosswalks where there are crossings to get across the roadways and turn over the site. As it relates to the sidewalk, so as I had shown in the initial slide, there are no sidewalks today along Queen Anne Road. As we look at the sidewalk within the project site, we want to make sure it doesn't extend out to Queen Anne Road for a couple of reasons. The first is to the extent that a sidewalk is constructed in the future, we want to make sure that we can connect up to it, that our sidewalk is already there. But also, as we look at school children within the project and the school bus, to the extent that the school department determines that they are not sending a school bus into the project, which is quite common that they do not go into private property, we need a safe place for the children to walk to get up to where the bus stop is, and then a safe place for them to wait for the school bus. So sidewalk extending out to Queen Anne Road, and then at Queen Anne Road, working with the school department to design a bus stop that's safe so the children have a place to wait up there. The other thing, of course, is the reality of looking at the site. I'm sure you see this on your streets within the town as well, that parents generally, some parents will park up at the bus stop. So the kids wait up there, so we need to accommodate that as well, and that's important because as we look at parents that may be waiting up at Queen Anne, we don't want them right up at the intersection, because again, it goes back to fire department access. If the fire truck needs to get in, the parents are waiting up there, the road needs to be clear. And so that's an accommodation that we've made. So recommendations, some refinements that you will see on subsequent site plans, because that's a reality and we need to design for it. And again, it's important for safety of access into the project site. The last set of recommendations deal with making sure that we have, as I mentioned, we have proper sight lines, but the important thing is that we show what's known as the sight triangles on the site plan. So the sight triangle is if a vehicle is, if you put the vehicle at the stop line and the motorist looks to the left or right, and they look out to see a vehicle on Queen Anne Road, and you connect those dots, it creates a triangle. Within that triangle area, and again, those are going to be shown on the site plans, we can't have any objects that would be higher than 2.5 feet in height, because the drivers assume, their eyes assume to be 3.5 feet above the pavement, so we make sure nothing's 2.5 feet high within the site triangle areas. That gives us a foot for snow, because the site triangle areas tend to be an area where you're not plowing, and so you want to make sure that you've got room for snow to actually accumulate and melt. The other thing is snow piles, is to make sure you don't pile snow right in the corner of the site triangle areas, that you remove the snow that's there. So those are recommendations of the traffic study. At the appropriate time, I think your consultant will recommend that you include those as any conditions that you might have. It's important to have the site triangles on the plan, because as the zoning enforcement officer, if they ever need to go out and make sure the site triangles are clear, they have a plan that shows it, and so they can very easily see what's there and relate the plan to what they see on the ground to make sure that there's no obstructions in these areas. Next slide. So the next set of recommendations is our off-site recommendations. So as I mentioned, the Pleasant Lake intersection with Queen Anne Road, it's an intersection that we know during the peak summer month conditions operates over capacity or has movements that operate over capacity. At a baseline level, the signal needs to be, traffic signal needs to be retimed to be able to operate more efficiently. Now, as you look at how the signal operates, there are movements operating with a lot of delay, and there's movements that are operating with very little delay. So there's an opportunity because of that to retime the traffic signal, to essentially reallocate the time to the movements at the intersection to more efficiently process traffic. One of the ways to think about that in terms of the reallocation of that time is today this project is not constructed. When the project is constructed, it's going to add traffic under the Queen Anne Road approach. So because of that, there's going to be more time needed to process that traffic on Queen Anne Road so that we don't get the backups that happen. Now, on the Pleasant Lake Avenue approaches, there may be some opportunity to move, it could be as little as 3 or 5 seconds of time from one approach over to the Queen Anne Road approach. But when you think about 3 to 5 seconds, and we do that every single cycle, that will add up to several minutes of added time to that approach over the course of an hour when we're adding the 155 or so subset of it to that intersection. So it results in a benefit in moving more traffic because we're adding a significant amount of time over the course of the hour to process that additional traffic from the project. So we recommended that take place at we call it 2 touch points. So the first would be as the project is built, it's probably going to be built and occupied in phases. So it may be that it's not all going to be built and all occupied at once. So we've recommended that the timing and retiming take place once at 60% occupancy. Because what we don't want to do is, if we retime it before the traffic gets there, there's not going to be any benefit to adjusting the time to accommodate the change in traffic flow. So we want some of the traffic on the project actually using the intersection and then retime it based on what's being actually processed by the signal. So we recommended that it be done once at 60% occupancy and then a second time at 80% occupancy. That's almost full occupancy of the project. And that will make sure that that signal is operating at a manner that can accommodate the added traffic that the project's going to have. So this recommendation was done prior to the intersection actually being listed as a high crash location. So that raises it to a different level because we're not just now talking about processing the traffic. We have to process that traffic safely. And so the way that we look at addressing safety at that intersection is it's a 2-step approach. The first is we have to conduct what's known as a road safety audit. So because this intersection, state-membered roadway, state-controlled, Cape Cod Commission involvement, the first step before we can do any work at the intersection is we have to conduct a road safety audit. So the road safety audit, I'm sure you've had some done within the town, What it does is it brings together the public safety officers from the town. So police, fire, planning department, DPW director are all involved in the road safety audit. And what happens is these individuals go out to the intersection. There's a facilitator that conducts a study, and it's really a design charrette where input is taken from the public safety officials to understand what are the problems at this intersection, what are potential solutions. That information gets published in a document that's known as a road safety audit. What that road safety audit does is we use that as a guide to effectuate improvements at the intersection. So that road safety audit is something that we're going to be recommending being done, and the consultant will point it out. That's the first step that has to happen. So we'll be starting that process. The outcome of that process will be a list of potential improvement measures. And then we will look at those improvement measures. You'll have that as well, and that will provide some benefits so that we can talk about what can we do as a part of the project to kick off that list. So there's going to be an entire list of improvements, and they are basically ranked as short-term, low-cost improvements. So those are things that you can do very quickly. Signs, pavement marking, signal retiming, they're very easy things that can be done at the intersection. They generally result in the most significant safety measure. So there's that bucket of improvements. Then there's intermediate term, mid-cost improvements at the intersection. So those are improvements that are a little bit more significant, and they involve geometric changes, signal equipment replacement, things like that at the intersection. And then there's long-term improvements that are high cost. And those are generally regional planning items. It could be just something like replace the signal with a modern roundabout. Those would be that level of improvement, the things that are really Mass DOT or Cape Cod Commission type of improvements that would be put on the town or the state's transportation improvement program list to be done. So that you'll get that entire list of improvements. We will then review that list of improvements and discuss with you what we might be able to do to advance the measures of that intersection. So again, homework on us to take as part of the assessment. Next slide. So we promise this is the very last slide. So the transportation demand management measures. So this is outside of these physical improvements that we talked about. These are really, think of them as managerial recommendations for the project. So the property will have a property manager. These are specific things that the property manager will do, really geared towards encouraging residents to use alternative modes of transportation, walk, bike, making sure residents are aware of public transportation services. Even if those services aren't available to the project site, there's generally a regional benefit if we do get people to use public transportation, even if they have to drive to get to that type of a service. But these are all measures that the management team will undertake to make sure that people are aware of what's available in the area, and especially as it relates to the bicycle connection is important in this area. Your consultant did make some recommendations specifically focused on bicycle accommodations within the project site. So bicycle parking, bicycle fixing station, things like that. So we're going to be looking at that, and we'll probably see a lot of those things on the next iteration of the site. So I think that's the last slide as I promised. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have now or after you hear from your review consultant. We do, as I mentioned, we appreciate the comments from the peer reviewer as well as from the town departments. Peer review always, as I say, results in a better project. And I think the peer review comments that we have and the resultant homework that we have to do, and we'll be providing some more refined information to you that will be responsive to what your reviewer has asked. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Judy, do you recommend that we postpone questions from the board until after we hear from the peer review?
Yeah, why don't you hear from your peer review consultant and then you can ask questions both ways, I think it'd be fine.
Okay, thank you. But before we take the next step, Ken has joined us. Ken, we want to say everyone knows that he was monitoring the meeting on his phone as he was driving in from some difficult traffic situations in Boston. I'll take this time to now introduce the board, which I didn't do at the beginning of the meeting. So starting with Ken.
Kevin,
Kevin Conley, Alexander Donahue,
Brian Sullivan,
Bruce Murphy,
John August, and
Michael Santos, I'm the town's peer review consultant.
Judy Barrett, I'm a consultant on the board for the Massachusetts Housing Partnership.
Well, thank you. So, Mike, why don't we, the board agree that we're ready to have Mike speak first? Yes, questions? Okay. Michael, the floor is yours. And be mindful of being close to the mic.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and everybody in the audience. For the record, my name is Michael Santos. I'm the town's transportation peer review consultant with Finasnang and Bruceland. I'm going to give you an overview of our peer review, which was submitted last Friday. Again, this is just the start of the peer review process. There will be some back and forth between us and the applicant's traffic engineer, so this is the beginning of the process. And as you said, I think that this will result in a project if it does eventually get approved. So we can go to the next slide, please. So just to give you a timeline and to update you on what we did review. So we reviewed the transportation impact assessment that was done back in October of 2023. An update to the trip generation was provided in November 11th of last year. That evaluated a smaller development program than what was originally analyzed as part of the TIA. And we also reviewed the permitting plans that were submitted in March 2025. So again, we did submit our peer review letter last Friday. And again, this process is still in progress. It's not finished yet. So I'm sure that we'll be receiving some additional comments that we can also incorporate into this process. Go to the next one. Again, the purpose for the transportation peer review is to provide the town with an independent and objective review of all of the submittal material, to review all the technical information contained within it, to review the transportation elements of the site plan. That includes the off-site traffic operations and capacity, including the impacts of the project. Safety is always a big concern for any development project, so that's one of the major issues that we also look at. That includes site distance at the site driveways, a review of motor vehicle crashes at the intersections, multimodal facilities and connectivity. So what we do is we review both the on-site pedestrian and bicycle facilities and how they relate to the surrounding transportation network. And then the on-site transportation features such as parking. Is there enough parking? Making sure that the parking is located in appropriate places. In this case, there's a daycare center, so we do have some comments about how that may work related to parent pickup and drop-off, and parking for the staff. On-site traffic control, make sure that the proper traffic control is used, such as stop signs, pavement markings, traffic calming, and so on. So that's really the purpose of this review. So this slide, again, my presentation will not be as long as the applicant's traffic engineer. I'm going to give kind of a high-level summary of the topics that we did cover, and some of the very key points that we had asked them to address. So again, the traffic study and the traffic analysis is generally consistent with both MassDOT and the Cape Cod Commission guidelines, although this traffic study is not being reviewed by the Cape Cod Commission. It still falls within those guidelines. We did note that the Cape Cod Commission does like to see intersections studied that may be impacted by 25 or more project-related trips. So we did ask the applicant to include the ramps at Pleasant Lake Avenue at Route 6. We're expecting about 75 to 85 peak hour trips at those locations, so we felt it was important to include those, and I'm glad to hear that they will be looking at those. Again, additional safety evaluations at the intersection of Queen Anne Road at Pleasant Lake Avenue. We did note that this is a high crash location. I know that when they submitted the traffic study, it was not listed as a high crash location. is now on MassDOT's list of high crash locations, so they noted that they'll be looking at that a little bit more in depth and preparing a road safety audit, which is good to hear. Again, the road safety audits are a really good tool to brainstorm ideas, identify specific safety issues, and then come up with really good recommendations. Involves the community and the applicant's consultant. Again, we did have quite a bit of comments about the proposed daycare center and how that may operate. They analyzed the daycare center using typical Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation data, which is compiled from daycare centers throughout the country and average, but we're really more concerned about how the pickup and drop-off is going to work. If they have a potential daycare center operator, if they know a little bit more about the operations, we would like to hear that, such as when it opens, when it closes, how many students they're expecting, how many parents are going to be coming to pick up and drop off. We did review the site plan, and it didn't really look like there was where any parent activity would actually occur. So we did have some concerns about the impacts of the daycare center activity, both on the internal circulation and also because it's so close to Queen Anne Road, that we want to make sure that there's no impacts to Queen Anne Road during the morning and the evening. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with daycare centers, and they can get pretty busy in the morning and in the afternoon. So the other things that we did review was the on-site elements related to parking supply. So we had a couple questions about how that works. The overall parking supply, I think we're okay with, but we want to make sure that the parking supply is placed properly for each individual building. We did recommend adding additional bike parking, and it's nice to hear that this is a really good location to access the rail trail. So we do expect that people that live here may choose to bike and use the rail trail. So it's good to have those amenities on the site. We also requested vehicle movement diagrams. So another important thing is to make sure that specific design vehicles that will be traveling to and from the site can actually maneuver around the site, and most importantly, this includes fire trucks. So we asked the applicant to provide vehicle maneuver diagrams, especially for fire trucks. They should coordinate with the fire department. Maybe this has already been done, just to show that a fire vehicle can actually maneuver through the site, access all of the buildings that it needs to access, and that it can exit the site safely. So that's just some additional information that we'll be looking for. Go to the next slide, please. So again, the study methodology is generally consistent with standard traffic engineering practice, both under MassDOT and Cape Cod Commission guidelines. They looked at the weekday morning and evening peak hours, which coincides with both commuter traffic and typical residential developments. The peak of residential developments also coincides with commuter traffic. So we're okay with looking at the morning and the evening peak hours, such as they did. They did look at both peak season, so the counts were conducted in July, so they looked at both peak season and average season. So they have two different sets of analyses for each season. Again, you can see the blue circles on here show what they studied for their study area intersections, and the two yellow circles are what we are recommending that they look at additionally. As the applicant's traffic engineers noted, 35% of the traffic will be traveling towards Route 6 ramps through the intersection of Queen Anne Road at Pleasant Lake Avenue. And based on the traffic operations analysis in the study, if you look at, so that the applicant's traffic engineer talked about cumulative delays. The other thing that we look at is something called volume to capacity ratio. So each movement at the intersection has a specific operating capacity, and that really depends on, at this intersection specifically, that really depends on how much green time is afforded to those movements, and possibly what the traffic volumes are on the intersecting roadways. So what we saw was that the eastbound movement on Queen Anne Road during the peak season time period, even under existing conditions, was close to the capacity, but still under, so there's congestion there, but it can still process the traffic through the intersection. And then when they projected out the traffic volume 7 years, which is MassDOT guidelines, again, you're seeing that eastbound approach kind of near the operating capacity. It's still slightly under, but it's almost there. And then when you add the project traffic to it, again, this is for the peak season and not the average month. The report shows that the capacity is actually exceeded because of the extra project-related traffic. Now, they did recommend that they would look at the traffic signal timing, which I think is the appropriate measure for that, because that their analysis was based on the full.
Folks in the back, continue your conversation out of the room, please.
So again, their analysis was based on the full build-out of the project, so it's not really by phase. So I think, we did ask for them to show that you could actually make those improvements and get that movement under capacity by the traffic signal retiming. So that's something that we did ask for to see if they can actually do it. I think it's possible, but we would like to just see that analysis. The other thing, because this is a phased development, there is the opportunity to, they're not going to need to implement those improvements right after phase 1 or possibly phase 2. So what they had recommended was that they reevaluate the traffic conditions after 60% of occupancy, because their traffic study is based on counts that were done in 2023. If and when this is constructed, and it may not be for another couple of years, the your baseline traffic volumes might change. They might decrease. They might be more. So it's good practice to go and reevaluate the traffic conditions, at a specific milestone within the project, whether it's 60% occupancy or, because it's a phased project, I thought it might be beneficial just to do that after phase 3 and reevaluate the traffic conditions there. This would be in the form of, essentially what we would call post-construction traffic monitoring. So after, one of the phases is built, or 2 or 3 of the phases are built, they would go out and conduct new traffic counts at the study intersections, provide an updated analysis, and then really see what improvements they need to implement. Now that way they're using actual traffic volumes and not basing it on something that was collected 2 years ago already. So it'll actually be beneficial to operations, because you'd be basing it on current traffic volumes and not just projections. So we go to the next slide, please. So again, I think I covered most of what's on here already about the peak month and average month conditions and the operations at Queen Anne Road and Pleasant Lake Avenue. Again, there was some capacity issues at the intersection of Main Street and Depot Street westbound. So that's vehicles would be exiting the site, traveling west through the 4-way stop. Again, I think that it would be beneficial to reevaluate operations at that intersection at a specific milestone of project completion. Because I think right now, there may be some issues during the peak month seasons, but really what their analysis showed is that even though there might be some congestion, operations are still operating under their operating capacity. But it's just something that should be monitored in the future. So we can go to the next slide. And again, we did review the transportation elements of the site plan. We recommend signage and pavement markings be up to the NETCD standard, so that's the manual and uniform traffic control devices. That's kind of a national standard for how signs and pavement markings and other traffic control devices are installed. So that would include how stop signs are laid out, crosswalks are laid out, how any other longitudinal pavement markings like yellow center lines are laid out. We did note that the traffic calming devices should be implemented here. There are some stretches that are kind of straight and long that have parallel parking on the internal roadways. We did note that they have, the site plan does show really good pedestrian connectivity throughout the entire site and out to Queen Anne Road, so that was good to see. Something that they also did with the pedestrian connectivity is where they had crosswalks internal to the site. They actually used curb extensions, so what they're showing is kind of a bank of parallel parking spaces for vehicles, and then the crosswalk would actually come out and shorten the crossing length. So that was something nice to see. We also want them to look into possible, if there's any additional traffic calming devices for the longer stretches of internal roadways. We would recommend that. That would be for on-site safety. It would really help vehicles not travel at high speeds. Those could include, raised pedestrian crossings or some other vertical feature to really make sure that vehicles are traveling slow throughout the site. And again, one of the big things that we had was kind of throughout the entire peer review is the daycare center. And I know that we looked at the site plans. It looks like this is kind of coming in the later phases of the project, but it really traffic patterns associated with a daycare center are completely different than what you would expect out of a residential development. Where you have people coming in the morning, and then those same people would be leaving. So you would have a lot of ins and outs in a short period of time. And depending on how it's scheduled, it's not. They reported, I think it was about maybe 50 to 55 peak hour trips just associated with the daycare center alone. Depending on how the operations are, those may not be spread out through the entire hour. They may all happen within a 15-minute period right when the daycare center opens. And then when you have pickup in the afternoon, parents may show up early, they may park, they may need a place to park and stage. So we really want to make sure that if the daycare center does get constructed, that these things are addressed. Otherwise, you're going to have issues both on the internal roadways with parents kind of queuing up and waiting for daycare to let out, and you may have issues with queuing back onto Queen Anne Road because it is very close to that road. We also want to make sure that there's sufficient parking for the staff that may be working there. So we did ask for kind of more detail about how this is going to run in terms of number of students, number of staff, how the pickup and drop off is going to work. So these are all very, very important issues that you're going to have to flesh out with the site plan. You're going to have to understand all of this just to make sure that if the daycare center does get built, that it functions efficiently and safely too. It's really there's some safety issues there. If it can't be accommodated, there's going to be increased congestion. People will be making the maneuvers that they shouldn't be, and that causes some safety issues. So it's really you're really going to have to get these answers on the site plan to make sure that operates okay. And also, we did not include due to the compressed timeline of this, we weren't able to go out and do our independent review of site distances before this hearing. I was able to go out and do a site distance review earlier today just to look at the two locations of the site driveways. So basically everything that the applicant's traffic engineer had mentioned about the site distance, we confirmed it. So the driveway on Queen Anne Road is pretty flat and straight where the driveway is going to be located. Again, there's two types of site distance. First, there's stopping site distance, which really need anywhere along the roadway. It's just the amount of distance that it takes for a driver to see something in the roadway, brakes, and come to a complete stop. And that's required everywhere on the roadway, especially at driveways where you need to be able to see a vehicle pulling out of a driveway. And then there's intersection sight distance, which is related not to the vehicles driving on the road, but it's related to the vehicles exiting a side street or a driveway. So it's really the amount of distance that they need to be comfortable to safely exit the driveway and make a left turn. And that's, you heard the applicant's traffic engineer talking about sight triangles and making sure that, you know, that if you're parked at if you're stopped at a stop line, you as the driver, you're several feet behind the stop line. So really what you need is clear lines of sight from that point to the right and to the left for a specific distance that's clear. And the site distance on Queen Anne Road, we don't have any issues with. We just want to make sure that the site driveway, if it does get constructed, that those site triangles are clear, that nothing is constructed within them that goes really over 2 feet. So that's something that should happen there. And we did also look at the site distance at the Main Street driveway, and we noted that there is a fence that impedes the site distance if you're looking to the left, or site distance to the east. And then also if you're looking to the right, there's kind of a grade and just kind of a lot of vegetation on the edge of the road. So really, if that becomes a full access driveway, for any reason, there will need to be a lot of clearing done, and I'm not sure if that's going to be on private property, so that might be an issue there. So if they do propose that as a full access driveway, it's something that we'll need to reevaluate and see what can be done from the public right of way, and see if there's anything that can be done on private property, which I don't know if that's possible. So those two things, we confirmed what they had reported in the traffic study. So, but in general, the Queen Anne Road driveway, I think will have enough. It's in a location where they can be provided enough sight distance. So again, like I said, this is just the first step in this process. There will be some additional back and forth with both us and the applicant's traffic engineer. So again, I think the schedule shows the next traffic and public safety hearing on July 9th. So hopefully by then, I don't know if we'll have everything done. I know that if there's a road safety audit that needs to be conducted, that's kind of a longer process. So I wouldn't expect that to be done by then. But if it does happen, if they are planning on doing that, that might be something that is, it needs to be coordinated through MassDOT. So there's kind of a longer timeline on that. So that may be something that is done later this year if they're planning on doing that. But hopefully a lot of these other comments, they can address specifically, especially our concerns with the on-site circulation related to the daycare, some of the other analytical comments that we have. Hopefully they can address those by then. Thanks for your time tonight. I'll be here for any questions.
Thank you. You hear me? No. Am I on now? Hi, man. Good. All right, so pretty confident that at the July meeting, when our board has had ample time to review all the data tonight, we're going to have additional questions. But I do have a few myself tonight, and then I'll be asking also the board members to discuss their questions. But don't have any questions tonight. Please understand we've got to kind of take in a lot of this data and analyze it and come back with some clear questions for next meeting as well. Jeff, you spent a lot of time talking about reviewing mitigation efforts. And certainly right now, there is heavy traffic on Queen Anne Road. So one question I have to you, I didn't hear it. I think you evaluated Queen Anne Road right now as being, as far as general use, the D grade. Is that where you're at on that?
Under non-solar conditions, The road itself is better, it operates better than it has capacity. It's really where we see the capacity constraints, as you might imagine, is at the intersection. So at the intersection, you're correct. At the Pleasant Lake intersection, also at the other end of the main intersection, under non-summer month conditions, that's correct.
Okay. So, there's a discussion regarding, 6% occupancy or whatever time frame of doing more review of mitigation efforts. And also, Mike reiterated that as well. But once you take a look at it, what is going to be the plan regarding, the cost for taking care of these mitigation efforts? I mean, some of them are, as you mentioned, the applicant is ready to, budget the time to suggest that, traffic light changes and so forth. But then, again, this is from a novice point of view. If these mitigation efforts, in view of it, going to consider, particularly the intersection here at 124, what's available to redesign that intersection and utilizing, and I don't know if there's any additional public land that's currently still available for creating, perhaps additional lanes. Perhaps sort of no right-hand turn on red. There's a separate lane to take care of that. Now, your client is not responsible for the other 40B that's coming up on the other side of Queen Anne Road. But that is on the plate. Now, given what your efforts are in the application of Pine Oaks, and given the future situation of the other 40B project, what's the opportunity for getting Cape Cod Commission, particularly Mass Works, that advertises that they're available to assist with 40B projects? Has there been any consideration regarding what they may be coming into, or what they may budget and make available, for real change and improvements, and not just on the traffic, but also safety and perhaps even sidewalks?
So what I would say in terms of the mitigating measures, what I kind of see is kind of, again, it would be a couple of buckets of approaches to mitigation. And this is what we would work with the town department heads, your consultant, and obviously the board for. There's improvements that the applicant will design and construct. And the traffic signal timing, as you mentioned, is one of the designs, designed and constructed by the applicant. So it's no cost to the town or community to implement those improvements. There's also specific safety improvements, and as I mentioned, I appreciate the police chief put together a list of suggested recommendations from the police department to address safety on the community road. And those are typical type of measures that we would design and implement, things that can be done. Again, I mentioned short-term, low-cost safety improvements as being the most beneficial. Some of the departments, and again, the police chief in particular, has offered feedback as to what they would like to see. And that's very helpful to us. So what I see is some of the feedback, such as from the police chief, are things that we will review and possibly design and construct as a part of the project. So there's that level of improvement. Most of those front-loaded improvements paid for by the developer are, to your initial comments, are really safety-related things. So there are safety-related elements, which we will also be identifying as on the Avenue and the Ann Road that will be designed and constructed by the applicant because they were necessary to address safety to your point. So those are kind of like baseline level improvements that the applicant would be responsible for. There may be some other capacity improvements that we can do, and to your point about capacity, it's something that we aren't necessarily required to address, but there may be something that Public Works sees as, hey, if you could just go out there and restripe a lane, there's enough public right of way that you could do a minor improvement, and it's not very costly. Those may be things that we say, we'll go ahead and do that, because it's something that will improve traffic flow, help the residents of this project, which is generally improve traffic flow for everybody. So those are kind of like the first set of improvements. Design and construct as a part of the project at no cost to the town or to the county. So we'll identify what those improvements will be. There's a second set of improvements that you're mentioning, which is grant opportunities. So that the creation of affordable housing at this location, because it's located on Queen Anne Road, and because of the identified impacts of the project, can be directly tied to larger infrastructure improvements that can be supported by either a Mass Works or a Housing Works grant program. So we will also identify those. Those improvements are actually, it does not cost the town any money to do them. It doesn't cost the town any money to do those improvements. We would work with the town to identify what those improvements would be. So those type of improvements may be something that the town says, we need sidewalks on Queen Anne Road. And so that goes into that bucket. And we put a plan together conceptually that shows here's where that sidewalk would be. At the Pleasant Lake intersection, to your point, is there public right-of-way available, and can we put an additional lane on Queen Anne Road or on any of the other approaches, because it can be done within the public right-of-way? That would fall into that category as well as replacing the traffic signal. So we would work to assist the town to prepare that grant application. And the grant application would include concept plans showing the improvements that the town desires and how those would improve traffic flow. So it's a plan and analysis to demonstrate that it improves things. It also has a cost estimate. Those will be put together, and again, it's submitted by the town, but it's tied to the fact that there's affordable housing being created on this roadway, and that it's meant to address infrastructure improvements that are benefits traffic flow in general, but also just benefits the fact that the town's creating affordable housing on Queen Anne Road. So that's the second set of improvements that we would assist the town in identifying those, putting the plan and grant application together, and then the town would submit it. That's done at no cost to the town. Doesn't cost any money. The grant applications were due, I think it was last Wednesday.
Yes.
So it's called a one-stop grant application, where the town submits a letter of interest, identifies the improvements. The state then says, okay, it qualifies, we're going to put it in the Mass Works or Housing Works grant, and then get you money for it. So we would work to assist the town to put that grant application together so that the town does not expend any money or resources to submit the grant application to go for those larger infrastructure improvements, which that I would suggest, again, we work with the town to identify that. That could be everything I just talked about. It could be fix the awkward geometry at the main and Queen Anne, because we know there's a grade issue and there's a hairpin turn issue that goes on. We put that in the residents, we know it from analysis. So that grant would look at all of that and put it in one bucket. Those are generally in the $4 million range. So we would work with the town to identify somewhere close to $4 to $5 million worth of work that could be done in this area and apply for a grant for that level.
Thank you. Mike, any comments?
I think Mr. Dirk covered that pretty well. I think that there are those improvements, such as the signal timing, that are lower cost that they can handle, and then the other improvements, if they're willing to work with the town and prepare the analysis and plans to apply for grants, that would be the larger improvements.
Gentlemen, you both mentioned how wonderful it is for the access or the availability of the Cape Cod Rail Trail for biking. How does one get there in this project?
Great question.
Yeah, so I think saying that it's a challenge is an understatement, because obviously the only connections, we don't believe we have a direct connection to the trail. So you would either need to connect to it, you'd either connect to it at Queen Anne, or you'd have to connect to it at a southern access point. There's no direct connection.
When the access point needed to go to Main Street, in fact, on the Depot Road, or up Main Street to the bike trail?
That would be more than likely. We'd have to find a trailhead at one of those locations to do it, but certainly, as I mentioned, Queen Anne Road is probably 24 to 25 feet wide, 10 to 12 foot travel lanes with 1 foot shoulders, which is not what would be considered shared driveway. That's a condition where you ride a bike, a vehicle would have to go with.
I do a lot of bike riding, and I'm fairly familiar with the bike trail and location these are, and really shouldn't put some concerns. I'm on board here, but the bottom line is kind of curious as to everyone's gloating about how wonderful a bike trail is, and just not quite sure how they're going to take advantage of it. Now, that being said, and as we go through the process here, I'll bring up more than once in the future, the opportunities of, instead of being an emergency road out to Main Street, what opportunities are created if it's a general roadway? And first question I have would come to, how does that impact the travel time, the road, what's called, trip disbursement, okay, and getting in your daily commute routing. So if there was a regular driveway out to Main Street, and we solve the site problems, and I realize that they exist, how would that impact the disbursement traffic?
It would result in better disbursement because of the fact that, it would lessen the impact on Queen Anne Road in particular. It would lessen the impact at the Queen Anne Main Street intersection in particular, just because of the fact that you would not necessarily need to go through that intersection. You could come directly out on Main Street, which is a lower volume, and I think we're going to have some travel speed measures the consultant's request. But I suspect lower volume, lower speed roadway compared to but the dispersal trips would be better dispersal. I think is probably the best way to put it.
Because one of the disbursements was 15% on Great Western Road. How are people from the project, from the development, getting to Great Western Road? Are they going through Main Street?
They're making that hairpin.
So that would reduce
Correct.
the impact of traffic and safety at that intersection as well.
That's correct.
So at this time, you're not moving forward on that subject.
So they were asking if we were going to formalize the Main Street access to the project so that we have two access points. So I think the applicant might be able to, discuss that maybe either later tonight or at another hearing. Right now, until that sightline issue is solved, and I think your consultant had mentioned, we can trim the vegetation looking to the right or to the west, but the fence looking to the east is I believe it's on private property. So unless a commitment to remove that fence happens, we wouldn't be able to advocate that actually occur because the sight lines are not appropriate.
No, it's understood. It just,
Yes,
going out,
absolutely.
trying to just get information on every.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One last question from me is regarding the daycare center. So obviously, all the car trips are going to be, if not 100%, 90% plus regarding people who already live at Pinehurst Village. The daycare center is for the use, for daycare of the residents of Pinehurst Village. So we don't have a lot of vehicle traffic coming in. Because as I listen to both your discussions, it seemed like you're analyzing traffic coming into the development to drop kids off, but I don't believe that's the case.
So it will be the case. It's going to be primarily it's going to serve the residents as well as people of the community, so there will be traffic coming in.
A little bit. Okay.
Yeah. Your consultant was very kind in the way that he characterized design of the daycare facility. I think what would be probably better said is it needs to be thought out a little bit better. I think your consultant was kind in how he described it. That needs to be reworked. And that's one of the things that as we work on the site plan, it needs to be reworked. It was laid out, at least in the plans that the consultant reviewed, not in a manner that would facilitate pick-up and drop-off operations that we would see at a typical daycare center. So I think we are going to respond to the comments your consultant had, which is you need to think about this a little bit better and come back with a presentation. We'll answer your question because I think part of it as well is how much traffic we think is going to be associated with residents of the project that will use it versus coming external and coming in. So of the amount of traffic that we estimated, we are actually going to show that some portion of it gets generated from within the site and isn't external. And so that will reduce the amount of trips coming from outside and inside, but there will be external trips coming in.
My understanding was that the external trips would be allowed for external residents in the community using the daycare center up to the point that the residents of Pinewood Village require those spaces.
And I think we're going to define that a lot better for you, because I think that that's not only the access and circulation of parking, we need to define what you're talking about as well. So we'll have a much better thought out version of how that's going to operate.
Now regarding the location of the day center and the concerns of both consultants, they're concerned of backup onto Queen Anne Road. Wouldn't the problem be solved or lessened if the daycare center was moved elsewhere within the property, so that you don't have, if there's a overflow and people parking, dropping the kids off, or they're parking cars and waiting, so they're not backed up on the street and find themselves within the Pinewood Village neighborhood.
So either that, which you said, which is getting away from Queen Anne Avenue, or have a proper design that has the traffic comes in and it has a large enough parking area and circulating area to have that function can't happen on the street. It has to happen in an off-street parking area.
Sure.
So again, it needs to be better thought out in terms of how that works. So we'll show you how that all will operate, but it cannot in any way be a situation where the driveway is the pickup and drop off. It has to be off of the driveway. And it has to be sufficient so that your consultant can tell you, based on the numbers I have, it's not going to cause a problem.
I realize that we're all here today reviewing the project to find the best solution, and the information gained from all parties will help, the applicant find those village to create the best opportunity for not only your own residents in the village, but as well as the community. All right, that's all I have question I have for today. Ken?
I'm going to withhold any questions until I've had a chance to digest the short information that just came out yesterday.
No questions. The only questions I have is the same one that Sean has. I'm having an issue with the daycare center. It bothered me from the moment I saw it, where it's located. Having had previous experience with daycare centers in my own children, and as some of you remember, this school up there, parking was all over Citizen Road when people were picking up students. Parents have a tendency to double park anything, anywhere they can. There have to be formidable signage to keep them off the roadway. Otherwise, they're going to cause serious problems with the children getting into these cars if they are not on the property. And I don't think anybody in this room, myself included, want to see any tragedy occur, the child walking on a roadway to get to their parents' car. And I have to agree with the chairman, if there's any way that this child care center could be placed upon that property somewhere other than on Queen Anne Road, it might be beneficial. Thank you.
Chris?
The entrance to the development, anyone going into the transfer station, the roads off of Queen Anne, if you stop there, like you said, the sight lines, people flying down there, has it been thought given to putting a turn lane in, or recommending that to the town to put a turn lane in, getting funding for that, in order to access the complex?
So we'll as we perform the updated analysis, we can look at that. What I would say is that the volume of turning traffic going into the site is not at a level where it's impeded by the traffic going in the other direction, so there's enough gaps in traffic that you're able to go in without causing any backups. It's not to say that we can't look at doing it, but the volumes don't rise to that level. The other thing that I would mention, as it relates to speed, and sometimes this may seem counterintuitive, but if you create a condition where there's no left turn movements and you can just keep flying through because you don't have to stop, you may actually have a condition where the speeds will actually go up slightly. So congestion in some points is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as the sight lines are there. You can see a vehicle that's stopped. The fact that someone may have to slow down because someone's making a left-hand turn will actually cause the speeds go down slightly just because of additional traffic on the roadway. So it does have it has a benefit from a traffic calming perspective to have some of those left turn movements happen. But as long as, I think your consultant mentioned this very well, as long as you can see that car making the turn, and I think we verified that you can do that. So it will actually have they have a traffic calming benefit just by having these left turns.
Carolyn?
Good evening. You talked about dispersal figures and how they were generated. Is that in any of the material that we have access to already?
So it's in the traffic study, and there should be if it's not there, we should actually have the backup information as well. So the dispersal is in there, but we actually have the census data broken out that will show you how we came up with the assignment of trips. We're going to be revising that to reflect the current information. So maybe when we provide the response to the comments, I'll make sure that all of the tables are provided that provide that backup information with the new census data, so that you'll be able to see how many people from Harwich, how many people work in Barnstable, how many, the communities that people work in, which is how that number is developed.
Thank you. You also talked about local knowledge.
Yes.
How is that generated? How is that information put together?
So the way that we develop the local knowledge is look at the existing traffic counts. So when we're performing our data collection, we're collecting really two types of data. In each of the intersections that you saw, we're collecting turning movement counts over so 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. We're counting the number of vehicles turning left or right or going straight through in each of those intersections for that time period. Each of the intersections in the morning and in the evening. And then we're also measuring, as I said, speed and volume on Queen Anne Road over a 2-day period. So we use that information to see how are residents of the town actually using these roadways. And so if that census data was to suggest, let's say, that how people get to Main Street or over to Depot Street, if the census data says that there's a certain percentage that we would expect going there, and yet the traffic count saying it's not that percentage, it's a different number, that's how we look and say, well, people aren't actually using the roads. Let's say we get the Barnstable, they're going a different way. And so we're going to adjust those percentages to reflect the traffic counts, which are how people are actually driving the roads.
Thank you. One of the things that's a big question for me is that the idea of bridges to include either intersections or roads. And I'm concerned that what if you don't get it? What is the timeline for applying and receiving franchises and of what types, so that we know in advance of approving this project that it's all going to work out. For instance, the intersection at Pleasant Lake and Queen Anne, I understood you to say that there would be improvements in traffic light timing, correct?
Yes.
What I'm concerned about is, based on that intersection, is there really a way to redesign the intersection
So we'll address that as a part of our response to comments, because what I need to look at is what the chairman has mentioned is we can research the plans to see what land is available at that intersection that is owned by the state or the town to make additional improvements at that intersection. So I will look to see what land is available to do that. There are improvements that we will do as a project that are the signal timing, but there's also there's safety improvements that the road safety audit is going to inform us as to what are those improvements that need to be done. And some subset of those will probably be something that would be recommended that we do as a part of the project. So once I understand what land area is available, I'll be able to answer your question as to is there enough land to actually put some additional travel lanes in there. So I'll report that as a part of our response to comments on that. The grant awards are, it's a rolling award, but you'll see publications in the paper, MassDOT will make an announcement, they had a MassWorks grant award to the town. It's rolling, so the applications were put in last Wednesday. As the state starts to review them, you'll start to see them coming out, let's say, I'll say September. But you'll start to see these awards starting to come out. So the awards are generally made in the same year that the grant application goes in. You'll be notified that there's an award and of what type of grant is the award. Is it MassWorks or Housing Works grant application? But it will happen generally in the same year. I would also say that very often there are awards made and the projects are not ready to be constructed. So even though last Wednesday was the deadline for the one-stop grant application, that does not prohibit the town from making an application prior to the next enrollment. Because if for some reason they award a grant and it's not shovel ready, the state may then say, well, the town's got something that's ready to go, so we're going to give the money to Harwich to construct these improvements because they're ready. So generally the awards happen the same year that the grant application is awarded, but just because the application is, they're not accepting any technically now, it doesn't mean that you can't apply now or after that. So we could apply tomorrow for a grant for the town, and the state would consider it if they have available money to give it to.
So what I hear you saying is that timing is not an issue, but what about the actual ability to receive a grant?
So there's a number of factors that the state considers in looking at. And one of them, of course, the state, as we know, as we've been talking about for housing, the state really wants to see is encouraging affordable housing to take place. So these grant applications aren't always associated with affordable housing, but what you want to do is have enough boxes checked to make the grant be looked at very favorably. Affordable housing is one of those boxes that is looked at very favorably because as the state wants to see the affordable housing created, we also want to make sure that the community, that there's infrastructure to support the affordable housing. These grant applications and the housing groups, grant application in particular, is set up to do that. And so they would look favorably on a project that's moving favorably through the approval process, and that the grant application would support the community needs as it relates to the creation of affordable housing at this location and addresses what's been identified as the impacts of that affordable housing.
Thank you.
John, just had a couple of questions regarding the data that was presented to evaluate further. In your updated memo, November 11th, the graph lookup charts, fixed fitted curve line is not on the graphs. Can we get a version of that that shows where the proposed project sits on the curve line?
Yeah, I'll print those out a little bit. They don't always print well because the lines are actually very
They're very faint on the
Yeah.
original one, but they don't exist on the revised memo.
I'll print some darker, and maybe I'll actually do them black and white, and they actually show up better than the color, because the colored version sometimes doesn't come out well. So black and white may actually work out better.
And there's a lot of discussion about the level of service charts and the grades A to F. Trying to get my head around it. Is there a table that actually we can use for comparison purposes to say what is an A, what is a B, what is a C? And obviously, it's easier. But I'd like to just be able to get how many cars are waiting in the standard rate period, things like that, for each of the grades. We have these discussions.
They're actually in the traffic study. The problem with the traffic study is it's very long with a lot of figures in particular. But I will extract those charts out and just provide those charts which correlate those letter grades to delays. So then you'll see how do you grade that, because it's a range. So like a G is like a range, like an unsignalized intersection can be anywhere from 20 seconds to 35 seconds. And if you're within that range, it's a D. But we'll provide the charts so that you
Yeah, I mean, I think given the fact that everybody knows there's already issues on the
Yes.
right? So I think to be able to evaluate the no build and the build situation, to fully understand what those level surface conditions are. That's it, Brian.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to break you in 1 second, but I just have right now one final question for Mike. Earlier when I gave my speech, I discussed the fact that roadway and safety issues, considering the responsibility of the applicant, and valid that the project involves extreme traffic and safety issues supported by the expert data. Now, quite sure as I mentioned the board here, our eventual deliberations do not be linked to a future grant from Mass Works or any of the housing and highway funding, except conditioning the fact that the applicant would do what they indicated regarding working with the signaling process and reviewing mitigation factors at a period of time. So the issue would cause extreme traffic and safety issues. Do we become a situation with that road? What is your opinion of that regarding this the traffic study that you reviewed and the impact of Pine Village on Queen Anne and Main Street and the highway network?
So just, so the question is, what is my opinion on if there are extreme traffic and safety issues caused by the project?
Yes, are there extreme safety and traffic issues caused by the project?
Well, first of all, I think the word extreme can be very subjective, so my opinion will be subjective, not really a technical engineering term. But I do think that after reviewing the traffic study, there's still some outstanding information that we need to evaluate. But I will say, if they can address all of our comments, including the safety and the traffic control issues, especially at Queen Anne Road and Pleasant Lake Avenue, I don't think that I would call that extreme. But again, that word doesn't, I don't really know what the definition of that word is. But, you know.
I guess my question is, what grading do we look at that, causes, this road network to become F? And is that the responsibility of Pine Village?
So I do think that they do have impacts at least one intersection that should be mitigated. And we're still waiting for the analysis. I think if they can show satisfactorily that they can mitigate if they can mitigate the project impacts at an already congested location, I wouldn't call that extreme impacts. As long as they can provide the appropriate mitigation there, to have operations at that location go back to what I would call the no-build conditions or better, I don't think that would qualify as an extreme impact.
Okay, thank you. The other one's, with permission, we're going to take an 8-minute break, and then that will be followed by the presentations from our two chiefs, as well as Dean Powell and Mary Valentine. Okay, folks, we have jump in. For the sake of time, we're just going to have some brief comments from David Blank, the Chief of the Fire Department, and Kevin Considine, the Chief of the Police Department. The other speakers are going to postpone their opinions until the next meeting. And then try to I realize we're running late. I realize there's probably about 15 people that wanted to speak tonight. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to a lot of that. I'm going to try to adjourn on 9:30. But of course, one reason for all this, we indicated in the schedules, the traffic study was both this month as well as in July. And tonight was very important to ascertain as much possible information as we could as a board to be able to digest for the next meeting. And my apologies for many of you who are looking to speak tonight that we're probably not going to get to. So, would the Chief of the Fire Department, David, are you available? Oh, we're going to have the Kevin, the Chief of the Police Department.
Fire Chief was gracious enough to have me go first. Thanks, Good evening, Kevin Considine, Police Chief. I just wanted, my comments are going to be brief because both engineers and both the studies really hit on a lot of my comments. But I wanted to open by saying I appreciate the time to have the police department here to address some concerns and how much I value the input of our traffic engineers and our safety, our assessment plans that were generated for this project. I have a great amount of professional prowess and great thoughts for these two gentlemen and all the work they put in. However, with the chairman's invite to us, and I clearly see the importance of that local level view of what's happening on the streets 365 days a year on all these streets in the area of impact, particularly Queen Road. So having me here give my thoughts about what our department sees day in and day out, what the future comments in July will be from the residents in our community and that live in this area is vital to this. The reason why I say that is because these reports are great. They're used on methodological procedures, computers generating data. What we see is real-life scenarios of traffic behavior. And we can say there's a certain amount of vehicle speeding on Queen Anne Road, but we don't talk about other driver behaviors and other traffic violations that are caused by an addition of 2,000 more vehicles in the summertime. So I think that's very important. The methodology is important. The computer data, the manuals, the state reports, that's all great, but the local level concerns is vital to this process. With the numbers of residents projected and total build-up, it is my opinion that this will impact our operations for calls for service to this location in outlying neighborhoods. Although difficult to place an exact number of future calls, I would estimate that an additional 75 plus calls for service will be generated as a result of this proposal. This is based on the applicant's current 2 locations during the last year to date. 48 calls of service have been made to the Bank Street, Pine Oaks Village, and 22 calls for service, police, have been made to the Layton's Lane. These existing locations are occupied by the population primarily over the age of 60. This proposed location will be utilized by a diverse population, thus increasing our anticipated call volume and call type as it compares to those other two locations. Not only will these calls for service be generated on property by those living, working, and visiting, but we will also see an increase in calls from outside the property related to traffic complaints and concerns, including responding to speeding vehicle complaints and the potential for an increase in response to traffic crashes. In addition to that, it would be our need to conduct increased traffic enforcement operations in the area of impact. Traffic safety. The proposed location of Queen Anne Road and other intersections around the property noted in the area study highlighted numerous safety concerns from the TIA, the Traffic Impact Assessment, and still leave some questions to be answered, although those were answered a lot tonight already. We discussed the upwards of 7,000 vehicles on these roadways. The traffic on Queen Anne Road is a mixed use of light passenger vehicle traffic and heavy commercial traffic. The additional traffic expected to be created by this project will only exacerbate the current issues we are experiencing on Queen Anne Road. It is estimated that this project will generate 1,904 vehicles in an average day, with 100 vehicles during the morning rush hour and 183 additional trips during the evening peak rush hours. What that leads to, and a lot of the concern tonight, is speeding. The report indicates with Queen Anne Road that the 85th percentile is anywhere between 9 and 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. I was happy to hear tonight that, the main issue is the 15% over the speed limit. There is a speeding problem on Queen Anne Road. Of note, in a recent serious crash in November of 2004, where speeding teens lost control of their vehicle and violently crashed just east of the proposed driveway location. At this time, there were 2 police officers conducting traffic enforcement, and the vehicle sped by them at over 80 miles an hour. We routinely get complaints and stop speeding vehicles, particularly in the area of the project, as the vehicles travel westbound and they leave the commercial district on Queen Anne Road, they enter the residential district and speed up. They navigate curbs and small hills in this area. One area of mediation, not only in the immediate impact of this neighborhood, but hopefully outside this area of study, was the suggestion of electronic radars pole mounted signs. And we're not talking radar, solar powered, ones that can be utilizing electricity from the poles, that won't die because the sun's not out for 2 days. Those are the ones we're talking about. So my high suggestion is the use of those pole safety signs in those areas. Pedestrian bicycle school safety concerns. Currently, a proposed sidewalk extends to the end of the project driveway at Queen Anne Road, but does not continue on Queen Anne. This project will lead to more pedestrians walking, jogging, or biking on Queen Anne. Without sidewalks and given the heavy vehicle traffic in this area, I have some major concerns about pedestrian safety, which was discussed tonight. One of the trip generators, I think, picked up on 5 bicycles during the time of study. There's a reason why there's no pedestrian bicycles or jogging on Queen Anne Road. I don't know the last time I've ever seen it except crossing the bike path. The reason why? It's too dangerous. The studies are not clear on school bus activity. The peer review notes that school bus access to and from the site should be outlined, and that necessary accommodations for on-site bus stops and turnarounds should be evaluated. The assessment also discusses the proposed widening of the sidewalk coming out of the project to accommodate the school bus stop. Again, I have some serious concerns about a school bus stop on Queen Anne Road. I suggest strongly that the applicant provide bus stop information in the proposed development and not on Queen Anne Road, and work with the school department and the bus company to accomplish that. Vehicle traffic and intersection queues. I'm just going to touch briefly on this. This was discussed at length. We all know that the vehicle queue at Queen Anne Road and Pleasant Lake Ave is a year-round problem, but particularly during the peak season, the additional traffic utilizing this will become an issue. At present, that queue is causing additional traffic to go right onto Baker's Drive and go through a very quiet neighborhood of many streets to maneuver to get out back to Pleasant Lake Ave. I have some major concerns of even waiting to that 60% mark. I suggested that light signals situation be looked at a lot sooner. And just the addition of, if it is 5 or 6 cars to that queue, is going to naturally make people take that right, and we will be dealing with those ramifications of speeding in those neighborhoods and those complaints. In other areas of concern of note for vehicle traffic backup at the intersection of Queen Road and Main Street, as well as Main and Depot. Main and Depot, that particular intersection, has seen a steady increase in heavy traffic over the last number of years. The peer report states that all the stop-controlled intersections in the area study are expected to degrade to the levels of service between 2024 and 2031. Finally, the intersection of Depot and Old Chatham Road has experienced 2 fatal crashes in recent years, one involving a motorcycle and the other involving a large commercial dump truck. I would strongly suggest that those studies include Depot, all these intersections, but particularly Depot and Old Chatham, and that the peer review outlined of future studies. I think there's a lot that can be done at that particular intersection to improve. Finally, it should be noted that on all occasions when Route 6 is shut down by the state police or by us, between the old exits 9 and 10 due to serious motor vehicle crashes, traffic is diverted off of exit 10 or off of exit 9. All that traffic ends up on Queen Anne Road. I've lived it. I've been to those crashes. I've helped shut down that highway. That happens at least 2 to 3 times per the peak season, every single summer. And whether you know the area or your GPS will bring you straight down Queen Anne Road, Great Western, Depot, Main Street, Queen Anne, back to the exit. So from a local level, I think we also need to consider that can happen. Daycare operations, I agree with the peer review that more information needs to be made available regarding daycare operations as it relates to the impact of additional traffic of its use. And finally, sightlines. We constantly deal with sightlines around town. Our department deals with these, and as noted, the project should ensure that signs and landscaping do not hinder sightlines, and that constant monitoring be part of this package, and that upkeep of the exits are performed. Typically, the sightlines are fine for a couple of years, and then everybody forgets about them. The landscapers don't do anything with them, and then they start causing accidents. Again, I just wanted to thank the chair for inviting me tonight for this comment, and just the importance of the local impact between our department heads, our public safety, and our residents is critical to this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. David.
Good evening, David Blank, Fire Chief. Again, like Chief Council, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm going to make my comments brief as well. I can start by saying any traffic concerns that I have or anything to do with the traffic study, Chief Council and I echo his concerns. It's just easier than repeating them all. I would add that Old Chatham Depot, my deputy fire chief, was T-boned that going to a building fire about a year ago, 2 years ago. So that intersection would definitely be a concern as well. For the memo that I prepared for the board, are my 2 areas of concern with this were site design, project design, of which most of it gets covered for us through the planning process, the permitting process. So we'll have our opportunity to weigh in on access to the buildings, hydrant locations, turnarounds, all those things are going to be addressed there. So I really didn't spend a lot of time with these concerns. While they're important to us, we have a very good fire prevention program, works with the building department. I know that those issues will be addressed through that process, with the applicant, so I'm not really concerned about what that looks like at this point. So far, we've looked at it from a high-level view, and we don't see any major issues. But little things like, will the stretchers fit through doorways? Instead of coming to an apartment and having a wall that's 3 feet in and we can't get the stretcher in a building. Like little things like that we're going to want to talk about and address. Hydrant locations, access from the area ladder to the buildings. These are all things that we will look at from a site design process internally, and again with the applicant. The other one's a little bit harder for me to discuss, but it's the impact on our operations. There's no doubt that adding potentially 500 more residents to the town will have an impact, but if you can predict human behavior, you'd be a millionaire. I mean, we can't. Based on the other 2 projects that are in town, we did about 250 runs there over the last calendar year. Again, the residents that are in those are nominally over 60. It's a lot of emergency medical calls, not very many fire runs, some sprinkler system issues, stuff like that. I would anticipate a similar level. If I do the math backwards, it's about 1.5 calls per room or per apartment. So if we look at it that way, we're potentially up to 700 more runs. Is that a big impact on the department? I don't know. It's really hard to predict. I don't see us like having to add staffing or another fire station or more apparatus to deal with this project. So from that, I really don't have a lot of concerns. The other thing that we looked at, again from the high level, is the emergency access road from Main Street versus straight travel time down Queen Anne Road or 124 to get to the project. When you run the time out, for us, the emergency access really isn't a benefit. It might be if we couldn't get to Queen Anne Road or we couldn't, for some reason, but by the time you factor in the narrowness of the driveway, a gate, and the speed that we would have to travel to use it, time and distance, and just using Google Maps, which is how I calculate it, it's just as quick to go Main Street to Queen Anne Road, even with that bad corner, and get to the driveway, or 124 and go that way. It's about a minute difference between the two, and only about 30 seconds more, depending on what you calculate the slowdown for opening the gate would be to get in through a Main Street. So for me, it's just as easy to go up. Hopefully, if at some point we rework that Queen Anne Main Street intersection, and it becomes a little bit easier to make a right turn, but those were our primary concerns. We really didn't have any other issues. We've dealt with Pine Oaks on a number of projects where we deal with them on a daily basis with the other 2 facilities. As far as project management, we have no issues with the company. Anything that we have is addressed. So that would be another concern for us, right? Are the buildings going to be maintained? Are we going to have problems with sprinkler systems, alarm systems, stuff like that? When there's a resident problem, we have to move somebody out. Their project manager, or their facility management company does a great job. We have no issues and really never have. So that's a positive for us, looking at long-term use and what it's going to look like for the fire department. That's really all I have. Again, thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome, Chief. Thank you. Chief, I hope that another meeting you might be available to both of you and the police chief to be available for questions at some point during this process. Appreciate it. Okay, so we are going to have time for a few public comments. And as did the last meeting, it would be about 3 minutes. There will be given a 30-second warning, the fact that at 2.5 minutes that your time's almost up. And that being said, our goal is to try to finish up around 9:30. Okay, we're going to try to finish up at 9:30, so I apologize that we're not going to be able to get a lot of comments in tonight. But again, as I discussed, please use the information you heard tonight, perhaps to assist your comments at the next meeting in July. So those who want to step up, I think we can probably look at least start off with 5 people. That'd be fine. So I'm not going to. And if you could state your name and address and so forth.
Good evening, Board. Thank you. I'm Patrick Otten, 49 Kendrick Road, East Harwich. I wish to speak to the traffic safety, specifically bicycle road safety issues. The proposed Pine Oaks Village 4 is at the west end of Queen Anne Road, North Harwich. Queen Anne Road has been evaluated and determined to be unsafe for both vehicles and pedestrians, both by VHB and the Cape Cod Commission Visit Zero traffic studies, rating the roadways D, E, and F. The proposed development of 242 units is adjacent to an area zoned industrial. The nearest grocery store or pharmacy is 4.5 miles distance. The nearest library is 3.5 miles distance. The nearest school is 3+ miles distance, and there are no adjoining nearby neighborhoods. Access to any of these resources traverses the industrial zone area. Industrial zone area includes semi-trucks, 18-wheelers, trucks and trailers, commercial pickup trucks, and other vehicles. Queen Anne Road has no bike lane, no shoulder, no room to pull over. In addition to heavy commercial vehicles, Queen Anne Road is heavily traveled, often with vehicles exceeding the speed limit. We've already heard that we quote 85% above 30 miles per hour limit. Imagine yourself or your child riding a bicycle on Queen Anne Road. For me, as a child, a bicycle was my means of escape to be on my own. I doubt that has changed for today's youth. Note, the rail trail is for pleasure riding. The rail trail is not a transportation network to take you or anyone else to your job. The Give 4 Feet law requires that all vehicles to slow down, perhaps to 8 miles an hour, yield until safe, and to give 4 feet clearance when passing a bicycle or a pedestrian. How is this going to happen? Or will it? What about 242 families with children riding their bicycles on Queen Anne Road? Bicycles have the legal right to ride on the pavement. They do not legally have right to ride on a sidewalk, nor should they be forced to ride on unpaved gravel side shoulders.
30 seconds.
Should we be prepared for fatalities and serious injuries? How many? What is the acceptable number? We currently have traffic statistics. What will they be in the years to come? I wish that my ask is not to approve the waiver Article 5, Use Regulations 325-12, road construction's requirements for certificate of occupancy waived to allow roadways as shown on the plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Kristen Cooker. I'm a resident at 323 Main Street, which is directly across from the Main Street access, and commercial property owner at 270 Queen Anne Road. I agree with his comments as well as the police chief's comments. The proposed density of Pine Oaks Village would adversely affect both my residents and my business. Adding the estimated 1,900 weekday trips to these already overtaxed, overloaded roads and intersections would cause my employees departing and returning from our business significant additional traffic time. This would, in turn, increase our non-billable payroll, wear and tear on our vehicles, reduce our production, and increase our overhead. But more importantly, my safety, the safety of my family, and the safety of our employees traveling these affected roads will be jeopardized. These roadways were not designed to handle this type of volume. This is a highly utilized commercial industrial route, which I haven't heard much mention of. Trucks hauling asphalt, aggregate, heavy equipment, fuel, trash from our town's transfer station, weighing 80,000 to 100,000 pounds, use these routes extensively every day. Material and equipment for every project happening in the lower or outer Cape typically are transported on these roadways. According to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, 40 miles an hour, which there is a 40-mile-an-hour sign close to the proposed entrance. which is the speed limit, in my understanding. The braking distance for the truck weighing 80,000 pounds is 69 feet. A massive development, unlike any other in our area, would add walkers, bicycles, and e-bikes to those narrow roads with no sidewalks, bike lanes, or crosswalks. Mixing over 1,000 tenants to this industrial commercial area would surely increase the already high traffic accident rates. I request that Pine Oak Village be required to make improvements to these roadways and intersections. I don't feel as though the financial burden should fall on the town. I would also,
30 seconds.
Oh, okay. I would also like more information about the Main Street Emergency Access Road. I've heard conflicting stories, even tonight I heard conflicting information. I would request that Pine Oak Village be required to have a locked gate on the Main Street Emergency Access in perpetuity. I would also ask that Pine Oaks Village consider reducing the scope of this project. It's too big for our community. It's too big for our village. Lastly, my message to the Pine Oaks Village Board, who claim to be well-intentioned members of our community, using 40B method to circumvent our existing town laws and force this type of density on our village. It comes off as overbearing and greedy.
I'm sorry. Is that-
My name is Trinity Guy. My wife Christine and I live at 148 Main Street. I just have one observation to make. If the primary objective of this project is to provide affordable housing, and the project is flowed right from the start, affordable housing should be convenient and pedestrian accessible to services and necessities such as groceries, work, medical services, houses of worship. This site does not meet that criteria. It is relatively remote, requiring private transportation to reach any source. In any decision-making process, if any criterion is make or break, then it breaks. Full stop. No more thinking is necessary. It's time to identify a site location that meets the criteria. That's all.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Matt Sheehan. I live at number 2 Rebecca Road with my wife Hannah. Professionally, I'm a patrol sergeant with the Army Police Department. I've been with YPD for 14 years. So I kind of look at this issue with a different lens than much of the general public. Listening to many of the points and going over the traffic study, just some things have jumped out at me. First thing being the length of the study that was done in July 2023, over 2 days. When my department gets a complaint from the community about a problem area, I confirm with my coworkers that do the traffic studies that study is done for 2 weeks. Essentially the battery life of the equipment that collects the data. So in my opinion, 2 days of gathering data is not sufficient. That's unacceptable. If I were to go to my superiors and say, here's 2 days of data, I would get told to go back and collect more. Some other things that jump out at me, as I said, I kind of look at things through a different lens. Mr. Chairman, you asked, what is extreme? To me, extreme would be adding almost 2,000 cars into an intersection that's already been deemed a high crash area. Extreme would be adding cars to more intersections that have already been deemed that have excessive delays or are already over capacity. The crash that Chief Considine mentioned, where my house is at 2 Rebecca, I was on midnight shift at the time. I was leaving for work. I'm listed as a witness for that crash. I was on Queen Anne when that vehicle drove by me in the opposite direction with 2 Harwich cruisers in hot pursuit. If I left my house about a minute later, I wouldn't be standing here speaking to you. Okay, so it is an issue. All right, common sense must prevail. We all know it. We are not trying to prevent people from having a place to live and work and make a living. This project is too big. Scale it back so everyone will not be put at risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be our last speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian Carno, 795 Depot Street, North Harwich. I'm also a police officer, so some of my letters have been stolen by the chief and the speaker. However, I think I'm uniquely suited. I supervise our traffic unit, and I'm a member of our site review committee, so I see traffic studies all the time. And I agree that 2 days in July is not nearly enough of a sample size to get a true reflection of what's going on. I did take a look at weather data. Those 2 days happen to be what we would call beach days. Partly sunny, 75 for a low, 86 for a high. That was Wednesday, July 19th. Thursday, July 20th, sunny, 72 low, 77 high. I think we can all speak to a beach day means a lot less traffic. I'd love to see the numbers on a rainy Saturday. I live in North Harwich. There seems to be a lot of assumptions that we all use exit 10. I use exit 9 all the time. I know a bunch of my neighbors do. And this traffic study, like the chief said, it needs to cover Old Chatham Road, Depot Street. I've seen the vehicles. The accidents happen, the traffic's only getting worse. We got to take a look at Depot and Great Western Road as well. That intersection seems to get worse and worse. The area continues to grow. Diggett's putting in a big trucking facility. Stonewood Products seems to grow every day. The hack facility, which is in Dennis, so I know it's not a big concern for Harwich, but it will be. It's only 15% full, so there's going to be a lot more cars coming to the main Depot intersection. So my recommendation and my ask is that we take another look at this traffic study, get some more data, and get an accurate reflection of what is the protection.
Thank you, Officer. Okay, as I mentioned, we have 4 more months of hearings. Those that felt they couldn't speak tonight or couldn't speak long enough, there's going to be ample opportunity to again address your points. I'd like to make a motion to conclude the period for tonight. Second, all those in favor? I have a few items here. I need to have the board make a motion to accept a peer review contract with TRC. That's the environmental group that's doing the peer review. Can I have a second on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. I'd like to make a move to continue the case ZB 2025-21 to the next scheduled public hearing on July 9th, located at 263 South Street, which is actually this lot, but the 204 Cultural Arts Municipal Building, with the hearing starting no earlier than 6:30 in the auditorium. That's my motion. Do I have a second? Those in favor? Aye. Thank you all for coming tonight, and look forward to, hopefully you'll be back in July.